After laying down in the middle of the ring at Halloween Havoc 1999 for Sting, we wouldn't see Hulk Hogan again on WCW programming until February 2000. Vince Russo was now in charge of WCW Creative, and while Hulk Hogan had been good friends with previous head honcho Eric Bischoff, the Hulkster's relationship with Vince Russo wasn't nearly as close. Russo wanted to push the young stars of WCW, and even though his creative decisions in World Championship Wrestling were seriously questionable, he still saw the value in new talent. When you consider that WCW had been headlined by superstars of the 80s and early 90s under the Eric Bischoff regime, then you can see where Hulk Hogan may have had a problem with Russo's youth movement. There's also a contractual clash here too. Hulk Hogan had creative control written into his WCW contract. Hulk could basically shoot down any ideas Russo had with one simple sentence: "That doesn't work for me, brother." Still, upon his return, Hogan would try to play ball with Vince Russo, but the Hulkster would only last a further 6 months before packing up his bags and leaving WCW for good. This is what we're going to look at in today's video. Hulk Hogan's WCW return was advertised at the end of January and the beginning of February. Hulk was coming back to take on Lex Luger at Super Brawl, and by the looks of things, Hogan was going to wear the red and yellow once again. The NWO were still around in the form of NWO 2000, but Hulk would have nothing to do with that stable. Hogan returned on the February 2nd, 2000 episode of Thunder to confront Luger, and the total package applied the torture rack to Hogan's friend Jimmy Hart the following week on Nitro. Luger also broke Jimmy Hart's arm in kayfabe to get a little more heat before Super Brawl. On the Nitro just before the pay-per-view, Hogan faced the Nature Boy Ric Flair in a one-on-one match for what felt like the 1000th time, and the match came to an end when Lex Luger interfered, giving the Hulkster a DQ victory. Hogan also got a kayfabe broken arm thanks to the total package, so the odds were seemingly stacked against the Hulkster going into the pay-per-view. At Super Brawl, both Jimmy Hart and Hogan used their arm casts on Luger, and Hulk won the match via pinfall at around the 8-minute mark. Ric Flair attacked Hogan after the match, and this prompted Sting to come out and help the Hulkster. The return of Sting was the best thing about this match, unfortunately. Hogan continued his rivalry with Flair and Luger for another few weeks. A cage match pitting Hogan vs Luger took place the night after Super Brawl, and this ended in a no contest after Ric Flair interfered. And then Hogan and Kurt Hennig were defeated by Flair and Luger in a tag team match. This all led up to the next pay-per-view, Uncensored 2000, where the Hulkster would face Ric Flair in a strap match. While the match was pretty entertaining, fans were simply tired of seeing Hogan vs Flair at this point. It was a consistent matchup in WCW for years, going all the way back to 1994, and the outcome was always predictable. Thankfully, this was the very last Hogan vs Flair match to take place in a WCW ring. Things were about to change in a big way for the superstars of World Championship Wrestling as Vince Russo planned a complete reboot of the company. This reboot would focus on young stars, and Hulk Hogan had a real hard time navigating this new landscape. Eric Bischoff, who had been released from WCW, was brought back to work in creative alongside Vince Russo, and this is interesting because while Hulk didn't have a good relationship with Vince Russo, he had a stellar relationship with Bischoff, and you just know that Hogan's backstage politics would cause some serious problems when booking shows and match outcomes. Russo wanted something new, Hogan had a track record of everything staying the same. I know you want to go straight to Bash at the Beach 2000, but let's set the stage a little and take a look at just how much WCW had changed after the New Blood reboot. Vince Russo announced the dawn of a new era in WCW on April 10th, 2000. Russo said he was tired of backstage politics in wrestling. He was tired of the hard-working superstars of WCW not getting a break because the old boys used their stroke to keep their main event spots. And Russo went on to vacate every WCW title while announcing that the future of World Championship Wrestling lies with the New Blood. Eric Bischoff came out and he hugged Russo, going on to say that guys like Scott Hall, Kevin Kevin Nash, Sting, Sid Vicious and Diamond Dallas Page were all his mistakes. Bischoff said that Hulk Hogan was his biggest mistake. Easy admits that he was blinded by the red and yellow lights, and Eric apologised to wrestling's new blood for pushing guys like Hogan for so long. Russo also took shots at Ric Flair while saying that WCW will now be a level playing field. All the titles were stripped, including Sid's world title. Sting told Hulk Hogan what Bischoff said backstage, and the Hulkster went looking for Eric. When Hogan found Eric, Bischoff implied that he was working everyone, and he invited Hogan into his office to talk business. Back in the arena, Billy Kidman came out. Kidman called out Hulk Hogan, saying that Hogan had ripped into him because of his size and his inability to draw money. Hogan comes out and he says that Billy Kidman gives the other young stars of WCW a bad name because all Kidman does is cry for a push. Hogan says if Kidman was a big star, then he'd understand what the business was all about, but instead Kidman is too busy getting whipped backstage by his girlfriend. A fight breaks out between the two men. Hogan gets the upper hand, and then Eric Bischoff comes down and Bischoff nails Hogan with a steel chair, busting the Hulkster open. Later in the evening, Eric Bischoff rammed into Hogan's limousine with a Hummer, so it looked like the Bischoff and Hogan relationship had completely fallen apart, at least on TV. The big takeaway here though is Billy Kidman getting the opportunity to work with Hulk Hogan. This was unimaginable even months prior to this whole WCW shake-up. At Spring Stampede later in the week, Hulk Hogan showed up during Kidman's match with Vampiro. The Hulkster destroyed Kidman, and honestly, we'd never really seen Hogan being this violent. It was different for sure, and it was also quite refreshing. After taking care of Kidman, Hogan announced that he was coming for Eric Bischoff, and the Hulkster began hunting Eric backstage. In the end, Vince Russo got his hands on a few overzealous police officers, and Hogan got arrested. Hulk showed up the next night on Monday Nitro, and Hogan talked about how critics have been saying that the Hulkster's time is now up and how Hulk Hogan is apparently no good for the wrestling business. The problem here is that you just know that none of this was heartfelt or real. It's that old Vince Russo blurring the line stuff that makes pretty much all of these WCW promos of 2000 feel a little forced. When we understand Vince Russo's booking philosophies and when we understand Vince Russo's creative style, then all of these worked shoot promos lose their edge, and it's that edge that's supposed to make worked shoot promos stand out. Once you see it over and over again, it just becomes like any other promo. Hogan began using his real name here, another played out trope of the worked shoot promo, and later in the evening Hogan took out Kidman before throwing him in a dumpster and ramming the dumpster with Bischoff's Hummer. So the main storyline moving forward was the feud between the New Blood and the Millionaires Club. The Millionaires Club basically featured veterans of WCW such as Hogan, Flair, Sting and Diamond Dallas Page, and the whole main event scene was centered around this rivalry between the old WCW and the new WCW. So yeah, while new stars were getting opportunities, the old guard was still right at the forefront. Hogan's rivalry with Kidman would continue, leading to two pay-per-view matches that were actually not bad at all. The first took place at Slamboree 2000. Eric Bischoff served as the special guest referee, so the odds were seemingly stacked against Hulk Hogan. This was a fun match, not much wrestling going on, but plenty of chair and table spots. Eric ended up taking a powerbomb through a table, and Horace Hogan grabbed Eric's hand to make the 3 count to end a surprisingly entertaining bout that you should definitely check out. The next pay-per-view match took place at the Great American Bash, but before we get there, I should mention that Horace Hogan turned on Hulk by joining Eric Bischoff in the New Blood. A cage match was scheduled between Hulk and Horace on the June 5th episode of Nitro, and before Hulk made his entrance, a familiar theme song played in the arena, the NWO theme song. Out walked NWO Black and White Hollywood Hogan, and this got a great pop from the audience in attendance. Hogan won the cage match, and he also took out Billy Kidman after the bout. So then, at the Great American Bash, NWO Hogan once again made an appearance, and the Hogan vs Kidman match had an added stipulation at this pay-per-view. If Hogan won, he would get a WCW title shot. If he lost, he'd be forced into retirement. Hogan won the match after Torrie Wilson turned turned her back on Billy Kidman, giving the Hulkster an opportunity to use a pair of brass knucks that Kidman introduced to the match. And yeah, that was the end of the Kidman versus Hogan rivalry, and while it's all good that Kidman got a chance to work with one of the biggest legends in wrestling history, Kidman also couldn't beat Hogan on pay-per-view. So here we are then, Hogan's title shot at the Bash at the Beach pay-per-view, Hogan's final WCW appearance. Jeff Jarrett's the WCW champion, and Jarrett's music plays in the arena as fans wait for the arrival of the chosen one. Vince Russo comes out before Jarrett, and the commentary team wonder what's going on here, something wasn't right. Hogan comes to the ring, he grabs a microphone and he talks a little smack to Jeff Jarrett, who is now standing at the entranceway. Jarrett gets in the ring and he lays down for Hogan. Vince Russo holds up the World Championship belt to Hulk Hogan before tossing it in the ring as the audience chants "Russo sucks." Hogan grabs the mic and he says,
"Is this your deal, Russo? That's why this company's in the damn shape it's in, because of bullshit like this."
As Vince Russo walks away, Hogan puts his foot on Jarrett, the referee counts, and Hogan is declared the new WCW champion. Tony Schiavone tries to tell us that this is all very real, and for whatever reason, some fans still believe that this was legitimate. It was all a complete work, and there's signs everywhere that tell us it was a complete work. First of all, if Vince Russo was out there, then you know it's a work, as explained earlier. Secondly, the amount of time wasting that went on during the entrances tell us that WCW were trying to stretch their pay-per-view time. This whole thing, from the entrances onwards, took up over 10 minutes of TV time, which I know doesn't sound long, but watch it back and you'll see what I mean. If Jarrett and Russo truly didn't want to do business with Hogan, then this would have lasted less than 5 minutes. Instead, we got a lot of stalling and some theatrics thrown in for good measure. And then we have probably the most important piece of evidence. We have court documentation. We'll get to all of that later though. The part that Hogan didn't know anything about was the part when Vince Russo came back out into the ring and he cut a scathing promo on the Hulkster. Hogan and his friend Eric Bischoff left the arena after Hogan won the WCW Championship. Apparently, John Laurinaitis contacted Hogan before Bash at the Beach and he told Hulk that Russo wanted Jeff Jarrett to win at the pay-per-view. Hogan refused, using his creative control clause. Hogan got in touch with Bischoff requesting some changes to the Bash at the Beach match, and Russo, Hulk and Bischoff came up with the finish that we saw on TV. Russo was going to blur reality with fiction once again, and in doing so, the world was exposed to Hulk's creative control clause. Basically, the way Jarrett vs Hogan played out was supposed to reveal to everyone that Hogan can use his stroke and his contract to win or lose matches as he sees fit, and to throw it back in Hogan's face, his opponent just lay on the mat, not giving Hulk the satisfaction of winning a wrestling match for the world title. If Hogan was going to use his creative control clause to pick up a victory over Jarrett, then Russo felt the best thing to do was to have Jarrett lay down in the middle of the ring and build a storyline out of Hogan's political shenanigans. That part went absolutely fine. Vince Russo came out and he ripped Hogan apart afterwards, and according to court documentation, neither Hogan nor Bischoff knew this was going to happen. Vince Russo said that since coming to WCW, all he's done is deal with the politics that go on in the WCW locker room. Russo said he was very close to leaving WCW, but he came back for the guys in the locker room who care about the company. But one guy who doesn't care about WCW is Hulk Hogan. Russo said that he's had to deal with Hulk Hogan politics all day, and the Hulkster wanted to play his creative control card, and to Hulk Hogan that meant beating Jeff Jarrett in the middle of the ring, even though it was the wrong thing to do. So there you have it. Hogan's creative control clause is completely exposed to the world. Vince Russo says Hogan got his wish, he's got the belt, and Russo promises everyone that they will never see Hogan in a WCW ring again, while calling the Hulkster a piece of shit. Russo then books Jeff Jarrett versus Booker T for the WCW Championship, telling Hulk Hogan that the belt he now owns is the Hulk Hogan Memorial Belt, and the belt is completely worthless. Russo threw out more derogatory terms at Hulk Hogan before finally leaving the ring. Later in the evening, Booker T won the WCW Championship, meaning there were now 2 champions in World Championship Wrestling. So Hulk Hogan and Eric Bischoff claimed they didn't know Russo was going to cut this promo, and Hogan took offence to what Russo said in the ring. He took so much offence that he tried to sue WCW, and we have that documentation that tells us exactly what Hogan was suing for. The first part of our documentation tells us what we already know. Hogan and Russo were in competing factions during a wrestling storyline, the New Blood and the Millionaires Club. We get confirmation that the whole Jarrett vs Hogan match was scripted to play out just as it did, and Hogan left the arena afterwards to kind of work the boys. He was pretending to be mad because Jarrett wouldn't wrestle him. Because of the Russo promo afterwards, Hulk Hogan attempted to sue WCW for defamation because of the things Russo called him in the ring. Hogan also sued for false light invasion of privacy due to Russo talking about Hogan's contract and his creative control clause. Hogan also sued WCW because the company denied his right of creative control because he was completely unaware that the title would go on to Booker T at the end of the evening. And finally, Hogan sued WCW because he wasn't featured in a main event spot on the pay-per-view. Hogan also had terms written into his contract that stated he would either be in the main or semi-main spots of all WCW pay-per-views that he appeared in. WCW counterclaimed this, however, stating that Hogan was obligated to appear in 6 pay-per-views a year, and that obligation wasn't met in the year 2000. In regards to Russo speaking negatively about Hulk Hogan during his work shoot promo, Hogan was asked to explain how this differs from anyone else cutting a negative promo on him, and Hogan said, "The difference in that negative speech compared to any other negative speech that's been said about me is it's the first time anyone has ever given a negative speech without running it by me and consulting with me and all of us agreeing on it." Because Russo didn't use the name Terry Bollea during the work shoot, and because of the overall nature of the wrestling business being a work, the court concluded that Russo was in character and Russo was advancing a fictional storyline. Hogan could not prove with clear and convincing evidence that Russo's statements were made with actual malice. In regards to WCW breaking the creative control clause found in Hogan's contract, Eric Bischoff testified on Hogan's behalf. Bischoff agreed with Hogan's claims. The Hulkster didn't know Russo was going to cut the promo, and he didn't know the Jarrett vs Booker T match was going to happen, so the creative plans that Hogan laid out with Russo were changed without Hogan's knowledge. Therefore, WCW were breaking the terms of Hogan's contract. Basically, there wasn't enough factual evidence as to whether WCW breached its agreement with Hulk or not. It couldn't be proven if Hulk didn't know about the work shoot or if Hulk didn't know about the Booker T vs Jarrett match. In regards to Hogan not getting featured in main events as per his contract, WCW argued that Hogan still got paid what he was owed in his contract, and the fact that Hogan didn't appear in main events was waived off by still accepting full payment for his appearances on WCW shows where he wasn't even in the main event. Furthermore, Hogan had broken the terms of his contract following Bash at the Beach by not showing up for events. Apparently, letters were sent to Hogan from WCW that outlined appearances that he was scheduled to make, yet Hogan didn't appear for those shows. Hulk was able to show evidence that the matches and scheduling for these shows were already advertised and promoted long before Hogan got any letters from WCW, and therefore WCW didn't truly expect him to appear. Hogan was also able to prove that WCW didn't write any storylines for him after the Bash at the Beach show, and Vince Russo even admitted that he had nothing planned in the short term for the Hulkster. Hogan also tried to claim for lost income due to a lack of merchandise sales and a lack of pay-per-view bonuses due to Russo not writing him into any shows after Bash at the Beach, but really in the end there just wasn't enough evidence to support all these claims and counterclaims, and because Hogan still accepted WCW money while recalling how much WCW screwed him over, that really didn't do him any favours. The whole defamation thing was thrown out too, but consider this for a moment. WCW, Hogan and Vince Russo had been airing these work-shoot promos for so long that everyone forgot what was real and what was scripted. The fact this went to court tells you all you need to know. No one was in charge here, no one had evidence to say what was right and what was wrong, and maybe the single most ridiculous thing about all of this is the fact that a wrestling storyline had to go to court in the first place. Vince Russo is still adamant that everything was scripted. Hogan and Bischoff knew about the work shoot, and they also knew about the Jarrett versus Booker T match. Russo argues that if he did go into business for himself, then there would have been some sort of confrontation between Russo, Hogan and Bischoff. And Russo argues that if he did indeed go into business for himself at Bash at the Beach, then there would have been some sort of ramifications. Since he just double-crossed Eric Bischoff and Hulk Hogan, then Vince argues that he would have been fired or he would have been in some form of trouble. While Russo maybe has a point here, the fact that Vince is so defensive about every creative decision he's made in the past, it kind of makes it hard to take what he says at face value. Vince doesn't like to admit when he was wrong. He always finds a way to defend his actions, and in his eyes, he was the man responsible for nothing but success in the wrestling industry. This doesn't get Hogan off the hook though. Hulk's creative control clause was really the root of this whole problem, but whereas Eric Bischoff was maybe able to manage Hogan a little better, Vince Russo's general dislike for Hulk Hogan resulted in absolute chaos and ultimately the end of Hogan in WCW. Still, Hulk Hogan was refusing to lose. He was trying to hold on to a spot that he held for decades when WCW was trying to go with younger superstars. Hogan was not prepared to give it up, and in a way you can kind of see how Vince Russo was maybe forced into doing what he did at Bash at the Beach. The whole situation was just a complete mess though, coming down to bad management, bad creative and ridiculous contract clauses. And so that was the end of Hulk Hogan in WCW. The next video in this Hulk Hogan series is already available, Hogan vs Rock at WrestleMania 17. The next Hogan video I upload will take a look at the return of the red and yellow in the WWE and Hogan's run on the SmackDown brand, but we'll maybe take a break from the Hulkster for a few weeks before uploading that video. I'll admit there's been quite a lot of Hulk Hogan content dominating this channel, and he isn't even using his creative control to make me do it. Thanks for watching and take care.